topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Inarticulate speech, inarticulate speech of the heart. Inarticulate speech, inarticulate speech of the heart. Inarticulate speech, inarticulate speech of the heart.
Hello, and welcome to It's Your Voice, the show that hosts enriching conversations in diversity. My name is Bahia Yaxan. I am a core alignment coach, an emotional wisdom training specialist, and a diversity, equity, and inclusion educator. I've had the great fortune to live in many different places and meet different people, and I find human beings fascinating and I love learning from different perspectives. And I have a guest today who I actually met in London. I was going to school there one summer, and we happened to meet at a Quaker meeting. And thanks to her, we have been able to stay in touch. And I'm so grateful for Kim. And before we bring her on, I want to read a little bit of her background because it's fascinating. And we're going to talk about neurodiversity and transcranial stimulation, magnetic stimulation. And she, I think you'll find this very interesting. Her name is Kim Hollingsworth Taylor. She's the founder and chief executive officer of Clearly Present Foundation. She works with neuroscientists, physicians, government officials, medical technical experts, other nonprofit groups, and those with autism and their families to advance the science and the evidence for a biomedical intervention for the core challenges of autism using transcranial magnetic stimulation, a form of non-invasive brain stimulation. And she holds a couple of degrees, one in Pastoral Ministry from Santa Clara University and an MBA from Stanford University. And Kim, I'm so delighted. Thank you so much for being here.
Hi, Bahia.
And I love your website, the Clearly Present website. And I'm so excited to see you. I want to ask first if you want to add any more to your introduction.
That seemed good to me. Thoroughly good.
Okay, great. And we can always weave back to anything, but I so appreciate you being here because the term neurodiversity is relatively new to me. And as I've been telling friends and others who listen or watch the show that there was a show coming up on neurodiversity, I'm not the only one who doesn't know what that means. That is apparently a new term for a lot of society. So if you don't mind, can you start us off by defining it, and you can talk about the project at Stanford if you want?
Sure. So I'm going to actually read this because it's better to have the precise language. Neurodiversity is a concept that regards individuals with differences in brain function and behavioral traits as part of the normal variation in the human population. And the movement of neurodiversity is about uncovering the strengths of neurodiverse individuals and utilizing their talents to increase innovation and productivity of the society as a whole. And my favorite, and that's from the Stanford Neurodiversity Project that's run by a genius named Lawrence Fung. My favorite part of that is their goal to establish a culture that treasures the strengths of neurodiverse individuals. I just think that's beautiful. So it's basically thinking about different ways of being as not necessarily deserving of medical diagnosis, but rather part of the kind of natural variation in who we are that allows us to survive in a lot of different circumstances.
Thank you so much. And thank you for sending that to me ahead of time, because I also love the way it describes that as like within the range of normal. There's just a wide range of how our brains function, form, what they respond to, how they respond, how they learn. And I had trouble spitting out the word transcranial magnetic stimulation. And I've read an article that you sent me, I believe, on other uses of TMS that are happening in the world. But I want to hear, you can start where you want to start, but we could start with like, what was it that motivated you to found Clearly Present, and to tell us how you use it and what it does, who it's for.
Sure. Well, to build a bridge with neurodiversity, I think that it's important to value differences. And it's also important not to devalue challenges. That you can have blue eyes and I can have green eyes and Joe can have brown eyes. But if one of us is myopic and we can't see, then glasses are a good help. And for individuals on the autism spectrum, there aren't any biomedical interventions for the core symptoms. There are like pretty rough drugs for people who are having great difficulty managing violent behavior, but there's nothing that's the equivalent of glasses when you can't focus your eyes. And that needs to change. So I come out of med tech. I was lucky enough to work at a couple of companies that thought about things like, why do we give everybody pills? Why don't we just give somebody something that's site specific to where they need help? And so I was attracted to the technology called Transcranial Magnetic Stimulation, or TMS, I'm just going to call it, because it's site specific. It is, as humans, we figured out a new way to help how our brains function, and it's using electromagnetic pulses. So the same pulses that are in an MRI machine, the same frequency, but focused on a very 1-inch part of the brain. And there was a group at Harvard that was doing research on TMS, learning about how brains are structured. And a fellow named John Robeson volunteered with that group. He said, I was diagnosed with autism in my 40s. I love what you're doing. Maybe you could study my brain and figure out more about why things work the way they do. And so they gave him, they did some diagnostic TMS pulses. So they were meant to understand more about what was going on in his brain. And lo and behold, he woke up the next day able to read nonverbal cues. And he actually did, if you look on the John Robeson website, there's a before and it's also linked on the Clearly Present website, the before and after videos for him. And he wrote a book called Switched On. He says it's one of the most important things that happened in his life. So it's not, just to be clear, I'm talking about an intervention that is FDA approved for some other conditions like depression, migraine, OCD in the US, but it is not approved for autism. My son was who was 13 and who at the time was 13 and had autism, was part of a clinical study at Harvard where they did a similar one stimulation. So 40 seconds of holding kind of a wand up to the side of your head. He got up from that 40 seconds, able to do things he hadn't done before. And he had physical therapy and occupational therapy and speech therapy and social skills therapy. And none of those helped as much as one 40-second non-invasive stimulation. And that told me that there was something going on in his brain that was getting in the way for him. And so my husband and son actually moved to Boston, and they did an experimental course of TMS. So 40 seconds twice a week for 10 weeks. And after that, he was close to neurotypical lasted fully for about 4.5 months. Then it slowly wore off over about 2 years. But during that time, he said, it's like there's more of me here now.
Wow.
One of the diagnostic criteria for autism is kind of repetitive thoughts and behaviors, sort of like OCD. And one of the things he said was, like, he could just talk about anything. He wasn't limited to the same tracks for the same ideas. And that was exciting to him. And to me, that fits well with neurodiversity. It wasn't fixing him. It was giving him more access to the full range of his personality. It was remarkable. And during that time, I read an article about how medical innovation takes a long time. This was an article by Atul Gawande in the New Yorker, I think called Slow Medicine in 2013. And it's about how we want new medical innovation to spread virally, but it doesn't. It is typically kind of a social phenomenon among doctors and researchers about what they know and what they believe. And I thought, I did a lot of talking to doctors and researchers. I could talk about this. So we formed Clearly Present to advance the evidence related to TMS as an innovation for mostly high-functioning autism. That's that.
Wow. That is amazing. I have so many questions. First, I mean, I know you're diligent parents, and I know you were finding and researching and finding every single opportunity that you could find, every form of support you could find. And it must be exhausting. And I wanted to ask both, like you said that he felt excited that he could have all these new thoughts and feel more of himself and be more here. And I was going to ask, did he also feel a sense of relief? Was there relief? And also what it was like for you as a parent? What was that like?
Well, so one of the things that struck me was one of the invisible costs of autism is that as a parent, right now, there are all these behavioral therapies that some work better than others. And I think they are most effective for younger kids. But we could have taken him to any number. I just thought of every afternoon after school, we drove him to a different hour-long session somewhere. And his two siblings didn't get to play soccer or do violin lessons because they were riding along to the therapy for their brother. And we were lucky that I could do that.
Yeah.
And this intervention was so easy compared to, an hour of a different kind of therapy that only kind of works a little every afternoon after school.
And so I'm just imagining, like tears of joy and happiness, and how you might have felt, and if he felt a sense of like, I don't know.
It was really profoundly joyful. And things like teachers who'd had him the year before wrote me letters about how he was able to go find another student to help him with something. He was able to get his work done. One of the theories about part of what's going on in the brain with autism is that it can cause kind of a neural thicket, so that and again, theory, and but there was something about this that seemed to make it more possible for the kind of neural impulses to get from place to place. I'm kind of describing it in a simple way, but it's like instead of having having fairly profound sort of attention issues and brain processing issues, he could just get stuff done. And I think for him that was a relief, and for us it was a relief, and it was also, frankly, a source of great sadness when it started to wear off, because at that point it was early enough in the technology that there was nobody who lived anywhere near us who we trusted to do something experimental with our son's brain. Harvard was one thing, but it was really joyful. He went back to school and he started coming home and telling us stories about conversations he'd had with people at school.
Wow.
He could rotate his upper body to face the people he was talking to, which you take for granted. All of that nonverbal information. He stopped walking on his tippy toes as much. So he looked more regular to the other kids. And, 4 girls invited him to the homecoming dance.
Oh my gosh.
And he was able to get his work done like by 6 p.m. instead of having us sort of say, and what are you doing now? How about now? What are you doing now? Which was nicer for him and nicer for us. But one of the things is it wears off. So he also had 2 years of kind of, I don't know if you've seen the Awakenings movie, but it's like you have capabilities and then they slowly go away.
Mm.
And that is what happened with him and with us. So there's just tremendous grieving about that. And it's, but part of the reason that clearly present is about evidence is that this is a very specific scientific intervention. And you can upregulate brain function some places, you can downregulate brain function some places. It's not something where, you know, you can hook yourself up to a 9-volt battery and be good to go. And so it's not something that's broadly available, or really available at all. There is a study in Australia that is actually doing a full therapeutic dose of TMS for high functioning autism. And then there's a study being done with Jamie McPartland's group at Yale, where they're doing one intervention, one stimulation, and seeing if it affects certain things. So not really therapeutic, but on the way to therapeutic.
Is the reason that you cannot access it, which is so painful, because it has not been FDA approved?
Yes, but the reason it hasn't been FDA approved is because there's not enough funding going into researching it.
Mm.
And I would say in general, so one of the things is you want to sort of make sure something is safe.
Mm-hmm.
So there's lots of data on general safety with TMS. And then you want to make sure it works for what you say it's going to do. And there just hasn't been enough research funded.
And you you are doing so much work and so much reading, and I just love your fierce mother spirit of, you just became beyond an advocate. I know you describe yourself as an avid amateur, but boy, it sounds to me like you have, looking at your website and being able to have other conversations with you, you're really bringing a lot of providers together. Aren't you kind of asking people to think about it and just drawing more and more attention to it?
Well, what Clearly Present does is we gather together scientists, physicians, stakeholders, and we spend 2 days just looking at what do we know about the brain and what do we need to know to advance the science towards proving the efficacy. Because the thing about autism is it's probably lots of different conditions, all kind of described as a spectrum, but probably different mechanisms going on in the brain. And it's only now that we can look at things like functional connectivity mapping, or how information travels within regions of the brain and across regions of the brain. And there are probably lots of different things going on there.
I was curious when you mentioned that for your son, you pointed to one side of your head. I don't know if you meant literally one side, but you said like focusing on a specific area. How do they know which area? How do they know where to focus? And does that vary?
The short answer is they don't yet. They have hypotheses on a couple of regions. So one region is the region that they stimulated with my son, which is the right inferior frontal gyrus.
Okay.
Because that's linked to language and cognition. Another region people are looking at is one of the posterior temporal junctions, which has to do, I'm not actually going to even say why, except that in other research, it shows that that area for some people with autism actually lights up much more slowly than with neurotypical individuals. So there's a delay in activation there. And that also comes out of Jamie McPartland's work at Yale. So to give you an example of one area where TMS is further along in terms of the science, when thinking about treating depression, TMS treatment for depression is FDA approved, and it involves stimulating the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. But a group at Stanford actually figured out that there's a deeper brain structure I called the ACC, and I think that's the anterior cingulate cortex, that is involved in depression. And so they figured out how for you as an individual, where could they stimulate here that would be for you neuroconnected with that interior ACC. And that they just did a study that the FDA granted breakthrough status because they had an 80% remission rate, which, to give you an idea, regular TMS and antidepressants are 30 to 50% remission rates. So dramatically more successful.
That makes me think of another article you sent me.
Sorry.
Thanks for educating. I'm beginning to learn some very, very basics. Can you share more? Can you share about, like, I'm just thinking of COVID brain and how that has affected so many people and so many people in different ways. And I know this is not your expertise, but can you share that, like that, and what you know about COVID brain and it's related to depression or other altered states of mind and TMS?
Not really is the short answer. I think people are still figuring that out about what might be causing it. I am guessing that there is a social component in the sense that we all get a variety of information from actually being with each other that most people were deprived of. That's a non-neuroscience answer because I am not a neuroscientist. I'm just somebody who likes to read about it. But I would guess that there is a social component and maybe a depression component in that.
And the word anxiety is coming to my mind. Is TMS is it used with
It is
anxiety?
used for anxiety. I actually can't remember off the top of my head whether it's FDA approved for anxiety in the US. There are other kinds of devices that also use non-invasive brain stimulation that are approved for anxiety. I don't know very much about them. I think one is called Fisher-Wallace or Wallace-Fisher. In general, my sort of outsider's perspective is that the brain is networked. So you can
And let me interrupt. And what do you mean by the brain is networked? What do you mean by that first?
Well, you know how we say like the hip bone is connected to the leg bone is connected to the knee bone? Well, that's also true of neurons in the brain. So when you affect one area, you are usually through connectivity affecting some other areas as well.
It totally makes sense.
And there hasn't, everyone sort of agrees conceptually that if you can help, you can also harm, and that it just makes sense. But so far, most of the connectivity effects seem to be, and again, this is my opinion, seem to be actually more beneficial than negative. And we don't really know why TMS works, except that we are electrical organisms. Oh shoot, there was something else I was going to say about that. Go ahead and ask a question. It'll come back to me.
Well, what I was just wondering is, I want to ask our sound engineer Roxy if she was able to, if she's able to share a photo that you sent. Thank you, Roxy. And this is from Clearly Present website.
Yeah, from brainwaves to breakthrough. Can TMS help kids with autism? It's a question because we need more solutions, and this one is pretty safe.
Oh,
and
yeah.
This is about the Stanford Neuro-Diversity project. And the cool thing about that is they are working with individuals on the autism spectrum and and employers to make more opportunities for using the unique gifts and talents of people with autism. So, and they have a clinical study where people can enroll, individuals on the spectrum or employers can enroll, and they will provide help and training around employment.
I love that.
Yeah, it's really cool.
That's fantastic. And I love that they not only know their strengths, they're there to help draw out the strengths and not just celebrate the strengths, but develop the strengths and find out what you're interested in and connect to employment. That's a beautiful thing that's happening.
Yeah.
And I love that it's a movement.
One of the, I think, medical things that is very legit is that things that individuals on the autism spectrum are interested in learning medically are not always the things that researchers are interested in. So, for example, there's a really high comorbidity between an autism diagnosis and epilepsy. But there's way more research about why people with autism don't make eye contact. Now, to be fair, that has to do with what's going on in the brain as well. But you could argue that the epilepsy issue is a bigger deal for a lot of people.
Yes.
And
that's another great point. And that to draw out the voices of
right.
people who are on the spectrum and help them articulate what they want.
There's something in the, Twitter feeds about, hashtag actually autistic.
Yes.
One of the things the Clearly Present Twitter feed does is disseminate information especially about clinical studies and new research. So it's a good place to, if you can work your way through the medical lingo, it's a good place to kind of keep track of some of what's going on.
Well, I think you do such a great job, like translating medical lingo to people like me. And I think you make it really accessible.
Thanks.
And what a difference that makes. What a difference that makes. And I don't know if you every single minute of your time is volunteering, because that is a lot of hours and heart and soul and sweat and tears you are putting into this and into the clearly present foundation.
Thanks. Clearly Present is 100% volunteer.
Wow.
So people are welcome to donate. All of that goes to advancing the science. I actually think that part of the gift of life challenges is that you can look around and think, I don't want to just solve this for my family. I want to make this better for the people who come after me. And that's part of what makes the pain worthwhile.
And you are so devoted, and your whole family's so committed. Which makes me think of your Pastoral Ministry. And not that it's directly connected, but I imagine faith is a nice thing to have. So you want to share anything about what that means to you in your life?
Sure. Well, I'm Quaker, member of the Religious Society of Friends, and we believe that everybody has work to do in the world, and there's not a division between sort of spiritual matters and human matters. I think that being called to something has to do with, what are you good at? What do you like to do? And where does your brokenness meet the brokenness of the world?
Wow. Nicely put. And I love the tenet, that there's not a division between spiritual matters and human matters. That's really nice, right? It's like integrated into our lives.
It's all of us only have today. That's the gift and the challenge. And
which makes me think of Clearly Present, the name. Tell me more about the name and what that means to you, assuming that
it's actually a Quaker term, sort of. Well, clearly means to be clear, to be certain that what you're doing is what you're meant to be doing. And Quakers actually have something called clearness committees that help discern things like, are two people meant to be married? What if you're having trouble figuring out what job you should be doing? That sort of thing. And then to be present, we all sort of intuitively know what that means, but it means being really where you are, rather than worrying about yesterday or tomorrow or playing on your phone, which is a great and useful thing to do some of the time. But to be clear and present, it made our family think of what Nathaniel said about there's more of me here now.
Mm.
That he had access to some of the like beautiful fragrance of his personality that he sometimes doesn't.
Well, I certainly, we have time. This is not a wrapping up comment, but I so wish for Nathaniel and anyone else with his experiences access to this. And what do you see? Like, what do you see in the future for him being able to have more TMS treatments?
Well, a biomedical treatment that's FDA approved and reimbursed is available. But it takes the evidence to prove that it works. It takes FDA approval. So, usually it's like 95% sure that that is what's happening. And then it takes insurers actually paying for it so that, because if not, it's prohibitively expensive. And you want that too, because you want to be giving people something that works, that, parents of kids with autism would do anything to make things better for their kids, and they deserve to have medical innovations that are safe and effective.
Yeah.
And I think for a long time, autism research didn't get enough attention or funding because, the kids weren't going to die and there was nothing you could do for them.
They thought.
Right, they thought. And that needs to change.
Boy, talk about exclusion in a population.
Well, and things like Down syndrome, if you see somebody with Down syndrome, you can tell they have Down syndrome. And you sort of know more of what to expect. But people with autism, one of the theories is that autism interrupts the muscle's ability to return to neutral. But it's different muscles for each person. So that for one person, they might be, holding, like, something is different than neurotypical, but it's different for each person.
That's so true.
And one of the theories about one of the things that could help with TMS is it could help the body reset to neutral. And again, that's a theory. It's not proven, but we did see it with my son in the sense that he carried himself more neurotypically afterwards.
That is amazing.
So that, yeah, if you want to look different, that's great. But if people treat you differently because you look different and you didn't choose it, it's hard. There's also so John Robison would say, he's written a bunch of books. One is called Look Me in the Eye. One is Switched On, which is his memoir of emotional awakening through TMS. We're a chapter in the book, I think, called Tuning Out the Static. Because our experience of Nathaniel was that it's like old people will remember TVs where there was a lot of static, right? And it kind of looked like popcorn or something. It was hard to see the screen. And it's like he always had this kind of static. And it was like after the treatment, he didn't have the static. It was just him there.
I can only imagine, and I pray that it's not years away.
Me too.
Oh my goodness. We have a few more minutes, and I wanted to just ask quickly, because you mentioned the UK and Australia. Any other kind of like information about what's happening in other countries? Anyone like you said, Australia is going to have a more thorough, extensive study?
Australia is enrolling the study right now, and it's being done by Peter Endicott at Monash University. You can find any clinical trial involving TMS and autism in clinicaltrials.gov, including the ones in other countries.
Okay.
But so that's when you can Google TMS and ASD in clinicaltrials.gov, and sort of you'll see the one for Jamie McPartland's group.
Okay.
There aren't very many, and there need to be more. And to be fair, most of the TMS studies are diagnostic, not therapeutic.
More information.
I will say that the reason we figured out about this way to help Nathaniel was they did one stimulation, and he had a statistically significant change in his reading the mind and the eyes test, as well as a whole bunch of, like, he stood up and rotated his upper body to face us.
Oh gosh.
And then he walked the kind of conventional distance with me back to the hotel, and he became more able to deal with change, which is hard to describe. But for example, we were packing up to go home from being there for a week, and he wanted to pack all of the trashy newspapers because it's kind of a hoarding OCD kind of thing. Okay. And it'd been a stressful week for me too. So I sort of said, really, could we just leave the papers here? And he paused and went, okay, which didn't happen before.
Wow.
So, I want that for him. I want it for other people.
Yeah.
And just one more sort of little safety thing.
Yeah, we got a couple minutes. If you want to, say your closing message, I'd love to hear it.
Oh, I was just going to tell people that TMS, or transcranial magnetic stimulation, when done by a doctor, the only sort of risk is of a seizure. And it's a 1 in 60,000 risk. So by comparison, the risk when you take an antidepressant pill is 1 in 1,000.
Wow.
So it's an order of magnitude safer. And that also, as a parent, meant a lot to me. There are so many dedicated parents of people with autism, and their lives are really hard. And interventions that actually help would make a huge difference to individuals on the autism spectrum and all of their families and the people who love them. It's a really big group.
Wow. Thank you so much. And for listeners on the radio who cannot see the banner that Roxy's been displaying, Clearly Present is www.clearlypresent.org. And I really encourage you to, it's a beautiful website, very educational, very informative, and there must be a place to donate and to
On
reach
the website.
and support. Oh my gosh, Kim, thank you so much. It's been incredible reconnecting with you, and thank you for bringing the attention of the world to this incredibly important and your beautiful family and all the families and all the people affected by this. And I also want to thank Roxy and our producer, Dean, and all the listeners and viewers for tuning in. And be sure to tune in next week to It's Your Voice, Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. You can listen on W4C Radio, W4CY. You can download the app. You can watch on Talk4 TV, YouTube. There's all kinds of platforms, live streaming. And may we all have enriching conversations in diversity this week.
Inarticulate speech, inarticulate speech, you're the